so lovely to see you all here. Let me introduce the people who are on the stools first. Right on the end we have María Ortiz, Managing Director of Impact Investment and Growth at Palladium, the global impact firm, which Sinead will talk a little bit more about in a moment. Next to him is our very own Adie, Head of Green and Good, who is here to tell you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing research-wise in terms of focus groups in the area of climate change, what investors are thinking and what consumers are thinking. And then it's our job to congratulate the other two people who are on the stools, because we have Naomi Conway from National Parks, who's Director of Partnerships, and Fermín Martínez de Hurtado, who is Head of Sustainability and Responsible Investment at Santander UK. And the reason we're here to congratulate them is just a few weeks ago, the Revere project, which they're here to talk to you about, was awarded Nature Project of the Year 2022 by the Business Green Leaders Awards. So congratulations to you two. This is an opportunity. Yes, please give a round of applause. So a real chance to find out a little bit more about the Revere project. The most important thing to say is this bit's not going to last very long, because we're very conscious that we've got a lot of very smart people in the room who are here to understand a little bit more about nature restoration, nature-based solutions. Please come in. There's, I think, a few more seats there, and we'll get you some drinks as well. So it's designed to be relaxed. It's designed to be informal, and most probably now is a good time for me to ask Sinead Magill, Managing Partner, Palladium, Europe, Middle East and Africa, just to say a few words.
Evening, everybody. Thank you. I thought we were competing with the sunshine today, not as well as a political crisis. So I'm very grateful to everybody for their time, and on behalf of Palladium, wanted to thank you all for coming to join us tonight. Revere is an exciting partnership, and I think you're going to hear a lot about that. But I wanted just to give you a few minutes of, who Palladium are and what we do, and a little bit of the logic behind our partnership with Revere, or our part of Revere, rather. So Palladium is a global impact firm, as David said. We've been operating for about 57 years, and we run projects in 90 countries worldwide. Most of that's been for governments, but recognizing that governments are not always the most stable or reliable partner or the most impactful, we set out on a very clear journey to look at how we could leverage in the role of the private sector and private finance to achieve what we call positive impact, which is basically socioeconomic or environmental impact around the world. And just to give you a sort of sense beyond Revere of some of the things we do, I always tell my children it's quite fun every morning. You can hear mummy's work in the news every day. We work on the Ukraine response. We run the UK government's humanitarian response into Ukraine and have been on that for the last 120 days, supplying ambulances, medical equipment, advisory support, you name it. We've been in Ukraine from the beginning, and that is something that personally I'm immensely proud of. We've also been working on health system strengthening around the world, from places like Nigeria to Kenya to Pakistan, looking at how do health systems serve the needs of their population. And then linking back to Revere, a large part of our work has been in forestry. And I say this all the time, we were in forests before forests were trendy. We've been working in forests for, I think, over 40 years around sustainable solutions that not only offer communities and income out of the forests, but offer us the benefits that the forests bring. And that, I think, neatly brings us back to the proper show in town, which is these guys here. But thank you, everybody, for coming.
So we're here to understand how to discuss corporate competitive advantage when it comes to net zero, and how corporates can deliver net zero commitments. So at Newgate, we're a bunch of about 850 strong now. We're in 15 countries, I think. Just got a big acquisition in the US. So there's a lot of expertise and research, insights, communications and advocacy. So we're here really to provide a little bit of a platform for big ideas and fresh thinking, and that's why we're looking at you four this evening. Pleased to have such a select and diverse group of people here. This room is full of experts. We have people from investment banking, we have think tanks, institutions, policy groups, NGOs, and it's lovely to have you all here. We're here to discuss how we do nature restoration, nature-based solutions, who should do them, and when you've done them, how do you prove you've done it? No one's got all the answers, and that's partly why this partnership, the Revere project, is a good example of how hopefully this room this evening can be a crucible for people to start conversations and work out how they and their business can fit into all this. So perhaps the first question is to you, Jose María Ortiz. There's a heck of a lot going on. Like I said to you yesterday, we've got 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You can hear the hooves drumming right now, whether it's famine, war, pandemic. Why should we be thinking about the whole idea of nature restoration against such a background?
Okay, that's not an easy question to start with. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for the question. Look, obviously I'm not going to explain you what's the climate crisis. I think everyone here is already converted, and if you are here, you understand why this is essential for the planet and the consequences of not restoring nature as probably today the only viable sink of carbon. There's no other solutions today. I always say until Elon Musk doesn't invest these huge vacuum cleaners that suck the CO2 from the air, today the only viable solution is nature. Okay, so why now, if we all understand what the climate crisis is about, and I'm not going to get there today, I would say 2 angles. One, a business angle. It's a business opportunity on the positive side for many people. I think there's a lot of business that can be created for many of us by understanding that because the climate crisis is going to happen, either we mitigate the risk or it's going to cost us a lot of money, and that we're going to be talking about disasters that we see every day, natural disasters that are impacting our lives, and therefore the way of doing business is going to have to change. So I think it's a business-driven opportunity in many cases. But for me, the second one is the most important and probably the one that is more dear to Palladium, is because unless we act now, the communities that live on those ecosystems will not have incentives to preserve those ecosystems. So the preservation of those ecosystems that today are the only viable way of absorbing carbon depend on the people that live on them. Many times, and people tend to simplify that nature is a pristine place. It's a place where there are trees and animals, and there's no people, and that's not true. There's no single ecosystem, except some parts of the sea, where people are not living in. And therefore, unless we find ways that those people can monetize the services they provide to us, which is clean air, clean water, biodiversity, pollination of plants, some agroforestry products, if we don't provide a way for them to monetize those type of solutions, it's impossible that they continue providing those ecosystems, because they have to feed their people. And as you said, there's the global crisis, and those crises impact them the most. So I think it's important that we act now to provide solutions to those people that are the real people that are going to make climate change mitigate. It's not going to be Jose María with the suit. It's not going to be Fermin, sorry for you, with the suit. It's going to be the people living in those ecosystems that are going to protect those ecosystems. And therefore, unless we find and we give them hope that there's ways to monetize the services they provide to us, they are not going to do it. And I think that's why we need to act now, because changing people's behavior takes time. So if we want to get to 2050, they are not going to change in 6 months. They are not going to trust us anymore. We need to prove them that we can be trusted with these business models and that they can change those practices. Practices that many of them have been having in their families for generations. And therefore, there's a huge amount of learning in the back of their heads, and we need to demonstrate that they can change those practices, they can monetize it, and they can make their families live better off. And that's why it's now. And I can get into the complexities of the war and the inflation and all these things later.
So I'll come back, because I want to ask you about the global perspective. But Andrew, I referenced that we here at SEC Newgate are doing a lot of focus group research, which I think is in 12 countries around the world, on investor attitudes, consumer attitudes, part of this global monitor ESG survey. What can you share ahead of the publication of that hotly anticipated survey in the autumn about the attitudes you're picking up around anything to do really with climate change from both investors and consumers?
I mean, I think there's quite a lot that ties into what you were saying about trust to lead change. So, yeah, I mean, as Daph said, we run focus groups on a regular basis. We did the last one about a week and a half ago with retail investors and informed members of the public. And I think the most surprising thing for me that comes out of it is when you ask the public what they think about ESG, they don't actually know what it is. And we have to explain it to them. And when you explain it to them, they really care about it. And they really care about sustainability particularly. But the big thing that comes out of it is they don't trust corporates to lead that change. And, you know, net zero goals, they don't really buy into them. They think it's kicking the can down the road. You know, they don't really understand the processes that corporates are talking about. All they care about is impact. And so when you ask them to explain what it is that they're looking for from the corporate world, the things they talk about are good jobs, fair wages. They want corporates to lead change through their supply chain, and they also want them to look at the way they operate. So, you know, how do you reformulate your products to make them more environmentally sustainable? How do you decarbonize? You know, all the things that you probably talk about all the time. But they want proof that that's actually happening, and they want transparency, and they want corporates to be authentic in what they're delivering. So that's what we get consistently through that research, and consistently globally when we look at this.
And we will share that research when it's made available in the weeks leading up to COP27, I think in mid-October. And it's the second in a series of global surveys that we do. And I mean, last year what we picked up on was this idea of consumer activism. Yes, we know about that in developed countries, but we were seeing it develop in developing economies around the world. Jose, I talked about the global perspective. In a moment, we're going to hear about Revere, which is a UK-based project. What's your sense? What global perspective can you give us as someone who travels from Ecuador to Egypt to somewhere else that begins with E? What's your sense of where the whole nature-based solutions, nature restoration, carbon offset market is?
So, look, there's certain things that are global. We were talking about decarbonizing supply chains. No, I like very much chocolate. I assume many of you like chocolate. Chocolate doesn't grow in the UK. Well, I don't know if it does, but most of it grows somewhere else. So that value chain, and we're working with some of the confectionery companies. Until very recently, they were ignoring where the cocoa was coming from. Not exactly, but they didn't care that much about it. Now, no longer. If they have a net zero commitment, they need to know exactly where it comes from. It has to be deforestation free. That's driving a huge amount of impact into developing economies. It is true that nature-based solutions is a construct. No, it's a construct that we, humanity, are agreeing that a carbon credit is a carbon credit. And like all constructs, until they don't mature, they are very different in different places of the world. So this policy divergence between different countries is driving a lot of uncertainty. People trust the UK policy environment, regardless of the politics. They trust the policy environment. So that's why partnerships like Revere can take off. People trust that the quality, when we talk about high integrity in the UK, it means high integrity in the UK. While when you talk about high integrity in the Republic of Congo, there's lots of concerns about this type of thing. Even the concept is the same as a carbon credit. No? So I would say there's these two drivers: the driver of globalization, which is being put a challenge with some of the things that are happening, but this huge multinationals want to transform their supply chains and looking for global solutions. And then there's the driver of the political nationalism and the diverging policies, no? And those two tensions need to be brought together to have a global solution. And we're still in that construction place, and probably you will be able to ask Fermin or other multinationals here. When they think about investing in the UK or in the US, they relatively are comfortable. When you talk to invest in certain emerging markets, they're going to be perceiving the risk much more differently. And there's people here in the audience that I know they are dealing with investors and with off-takers every day, and they are receiving this type of feedbacks constantly.
Final question to you two both before we move on to Naomi and Fermin. COP27 is early November. You've already talked about the importance of indigenous communities, local populations having a sense of buy-in. You've written a very good thought leadership piece about why the farmers of Ecuador, the banana farmers of Ecuador, need to feel as though they're invested in the international climate conference talks. Any hopes that's going to happen anytime soon?
So I think coming back to the challenges that if I had to ask one single topic of discussion in COP27, would be how we can overcome the dichotomy of food security and climate. That dichotomy wasn't here before Ukraine war. Now it's here. Before Ukraine war, we didn't have a famine in the world. Now we do have it, no? And I think that's a huge challenge, that we are living it everywhere, no? I work very much in the Middle East, for example, or we work a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's really, really, really a huge crisis. When you read it in the newspaper, it's not newspaper talking or being alarmist, it's true. So I think a big discussion topic is food security versus climate, and how we can bring this dichotomy together into a solution that transcends this, either I use the land for preservation or I use the land for growing food. And I don't have the solution. It's not what is the solution, I don't know. But I think that for me would be a central conversation that I would like politicians to have in COP27, because I even see it here in the UK. There's been very recently a change of policy around biodiversity credits to favor agricultural land in the fear of food security concerns, no? And if it's happening here, which is the most progressive or one of the most progressive policy environments for climate, what is happening somewhere else? And I think that would be my ask for COP27, if I could have an ask for whoever is going to be the next prime minister to take to the conversation.
Let me just pick up on what Jose has just said, because as you can see, Steve here is filming what's being said up here. But when this set part of the evening comes to an end, one of the things that my colleague Sophie's keen to do is go around those of you in the audience who wish to contribute any ideas that you'd like to see, either in terms of the COP27 discussions or indeed how we reach net zero. And can I also encourage you, if you haven't come across the Palladium Catalyst website, which is full of thought leadership, there's lots of really interesting pieces by Jose there around. And one of my favorites was the one you wrote about there's more to saving the planet than planting trees, which is one of my other, I thought was very useful. Thanks to you both. We're now going to turn to Naomi and Fermin. You're both excused if you'd like to, or you're happy to stay there, whichever you like. For those of us in the room who've never heard of the Revere project, what is it, and why do you think it was described by the judges at the Business Green Leaders Awards as ambitious and visionary?
So I work for the national parks. I represent all 15 of the UK's national parks. And my role is about creating partnerships between those parks and partners, mostly commercial partners, but anyone who can help us to move forward in our ambitions. And Revere is a partnership with Palladium, but it came from, my job is often to listen to the parks and to try and, in what I hear, pull out the ways in which when parks collaborate, they can have impact. And a couple of years ago, the chief execs of the parks told me that where they thought they could have the biggest collaborative impact was around climate change. And this is it's more than, probably it's about 3 years ago, pre-COVID. And when the climate emergency was sort of not quite mainstream yet. And I thought that was really interesting, and I developed that idea, and I asked the parks back, what would you do if you had endless amounts of money? What does nature restoration look like in the national parks? It was new to me. I hadn't dealt with anything in that area. And what they sent back to me was about 20 projects of peatland restoration, woodland management, pollination corridors, and it would cost, just to deliver those projects, was about £240 million by 2030. It wasn't to do with reaching any particular net zero targets, although there would be carbon benefits clearly of doing that work. And it showed me quite quickly the sort of scale that we were looking at when you think about the 15 national parks that cover about 10% of Great Britain's land mass. And I put that together in a portfolio sort of called Net Zero with Nature, really just because it was an eye-catching, ear-catching title, because everything was starting to be net zero. And I went out to companies and just started chatting about it, saying, look, we're thinking of doing this. How could we work together? And one of those companies was Palladium. And they came back to me with a really exciting proposition, which was, we're seeking to start investigating the natural capital market in the UK. Can we work with the national parks to see what we can do together? Because we've been doing this in the tropics. We're interested in the UK. Let's work on some projects and pilots, go for funding together. And that's where it came from. And I think the reason why it was seen as ambitious and visionary is because I think it's the nature of that collaboration. When you bring the two worlds together, national parks, sort of interesting quangoey non-profit entities, and Palladium, you know, experts in green finance and emerging business, it's that combination that is quite catalytic. And so our progress in the first 18 months has been really quite fast, securing fantastic partners like Santander UK, also working with Estee Lauder companies, getting quite a large amount of public funding as well. It's just caught people's imaginations, I think. Yeah.
So you've done a great job of explaining why national parks would want money. Fermin, explain to us why you want to get involved in this. What's the upside for Santander UK?
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate this afternoon. So I think, you know, you mentioned famine, cost of living crisis, energy crisis, and I would put climate change at the top of that list even, because, you know, I think we all recognize, and Santander recognizes, climate change is one of the biggest, you know, challenges society is facing in the long run. And even if we compare to the pandemic, I think the pandemic has, you know, been very challenging for many. But I think we're starting to see the end of that. And the way I normally try to explain climate change to many people is saying it's a pandemic in slow motion. You know, in order to see the impacts of climate change, it might take longer than the pandemic, but actually the recovery is going to take much longer than also the recovery from the pandemic. So, you know, we at Santander recognize that. And we also recognize the close link and alignment between climate change and nature. Nature plays a fundamental role in the way we are fighting climate change. So that was the starting point for us. And we started looking for projects or potential involvements in the UK, you know, to see what we could be doing together with nature. And, you know, we started engaging with national parks. It was a credible partnership because they were bringing experts to the mix. So Palladium, having done this many times in the developing markets, I think was also bringing credibility to the potential partnerships for them. And at the end, it was an opportunity for us to be engaging in such topic in the UK. And let's face it, climate change is very intangible. So also, in order to communicate to colleagues internally, to society, to our customers, if we talk about, you know, climate change and investing in a project in Latin America, where we have a footprint and we, you know, Santander could say, let's go to Latin America, that would be having a huge impact in nature as well, but it will feel still intangible to many people. For us, Revere was an opportunity to also bring to life fighting climate change in the UK. So you actually, you know, can point out, you know, this is a national park we're working on, and you're bringing that transparency that Andrew actually mentioned. I think customers and colleagues also in the bank are willing to understand, you know, climate change, but also understand, you know, the tangible and the practical things that we as a bank are doing to fight it. So I think Revere was definitely covering that.
People in this room work for very impatient organisations who want results. They want to see outcomes. This thing only got launched last October, so it's a little bit unfair, but I do need to ask the question to you, most probably Naomi first. What would you say is the impact that you can detect, and what could you share with the audience about what, because it's a pilot, what are you hoping to achieve, for example, in the Cairngorms and dealing with degraded peatland?
Yeah, I mean, the ambition of impact for Revere is huge. We want to be able to leverage hundreds of millions of pounds worth of funding into investment into restoring hundreds of thousands of acres of UK nature. And to reach that impact will take quite a long time. And there's also, I say it quite often, there's no shortcuts to getting there either. So we're doing the nature of our pilots, and we've got 12 pilots now in different locations, testing different variables of ecosystem services, different types of landowners. You have to put in all that pilot work to tease out the sort of winning formulae. So it's quite painstaking. So you can look at impact at a local level. You know, there's a pilot project happening in the New Forest, which we'll share the findings of that pilot over the summer. Look forward to sharing that with you guys, where it's had a huge impact on the way in which the National Park Authority is thinking about landscape usage and how it can support the landowners in the New Forest to explore new business models that actually might restore nature and also provide a living for those people. At a local level, that's a really important impact. That's a step change for them in their thinking. But you've got to imagine that happening in sort of hundreds of locations and thousands of landowners across the UK for it to start to reach the scale that we're talking about. So the impact might be quite hard to detect at a UK level because we're having to do these incremental, lots of small bits and bobs. But I do think it will hit a tipping point where we get enough momentum and suddenly it just becomes the MO for everyone, that it's accepted there are really strong business models for landowners that pay them well to restore land.
So name is just used for one of those popular words in enterprise and finance, scaling up. One of the things you talk about Revere is this idea of building a nationwide portfolio. I think the figure is 240 million quid by 2030 is the kind of stated public and hope or anticipation for the Revere project. As a hard-headed finance guy, what can you tell us about the mixture of profit and preservation? Business case, but also the word profit. I've used the word profit because there's nobody in this room who isn't charged with dealing with a profit. That's my boss who's sitting at the back there with the phone. So where do you find the profit?
Yeah, I mean, and I would refer to profit, but also to the business case and the value in engaging with Revere. I think, everything starts with, for example, access to carbon credits that come from the UK. If you look at the current market, there's none. So if we're, Santander since 2020 has been carbon neutral. That means offsetting emissions from scope 1 and 2 emissions, not financed emissions, only scope 1 and 2. And we were offsetting some of this with, projects and carbon credits coming from elsewhere. And that, of course, doesn't resonate with colleagues and customers. So we were, in first place, looking to, okay, how do we bring some credibility into this messaging? And that's value to us. Then the second thing, in order to scale and to, play other roles, we need to make sure we are supporting pilots and we are getting insights from these exercises. Investing in nature and trying to understand how these ecosystem services are generated, in which rate, which volume, at what time. It's it's steps that are part of the process, and Santander was willing to be there from the very beginning, learning from the experience. And we recognize this is a pilot, as Naomi has mentioned, but of course that's a step that we need to do in order to scale up. And for us was also an opportunity to understand what role Santander could play in a carbon or ecosystem service market, where there's carbon trader, creating investment funds, and it's part of our learning process for us as a bank. So there's a clear business case for us. It's not just the pure, access to carbon credits that are local and that will have a brand and a message in our communications value, but also it could open new business opportunities for us as a bank.
Okay. Final question. How do others get involved? And that's to you both.
I think, not just for nature restoration, but climate change and, in my role of, I oversee sustainability as a topic. So financial inclusion, other topics. And I think I'm a strong believer of collaboration. So many of these issues won't be solved by a single player. And when it comes to nature restoration, I think, collaboration should be at the heart of it. We are bankers. We're not, we don't work in nature on a frequent basis, although I would love to. And we need people that are, have that knowledge and expertise that enable us to be successful. And the collaboration shouldn't be just with the UK National Parks, with Palladium. We also need the support from governments, from public policy to make, these investments also appealing and to help accelerate and scale up. So, I think collaboration should be at the heart of this, and there's, a role for everyone to be playing. And as Naomi said, there's investment opportunities, and engaging in these pilots will enable us to learn more and to be better and more successful.
What do you do?
As Fermin says, I mean, information share. So we're always happy to talk about Revere to anyone else sort of within the sector or that has an interest in green finance. But one of our objectives is for knowledge share. So it's not about kind of keeping it all to ourselves, because the idea is that if we find something that works, we want people to know about it so they can replicate it and restore more nature. But broadly, Revere is aiming, we're sort of gone into sort of 3 portfolios of like woodland restoration, peatland restoration and innovation. And so partners can get involved if they want to get behind the work we're doing in a similar way to Santander. They've got an interest in getting involved in quite large scale woodland restoration for carbon credits or for other reasons, or peatland restoration. There's a lot of both of those in national parks, but also the innovation piece, which is more actually, Santander have done a mixture of innovation and peatland, which is actually getting behind the more nascent areas of this work, where we're testing things that are a bit more, they're not ready, they're not going to have saleable ecosystems at the end of it, but we need to do the testing work with landowners to see what might be possible. And we're always really keen to work with partners who might want to get behind some of the innovation side of things, which isn't as long-term or as expensive as kind of commissioning a big woodland project. So yeah, woodland, peatland, innovation and sharing knowledge are the ways to get involved.
So the good news is the formal bit is over, and now it's the informal bit. Back here we have some of the finest canapes known to man and woman, and a fridge full of drink. Part of the reason why we're not opening it for questions is because what we're hoping is both to encourage you to get off your bottoms and go and talk to some of the people who are here. You've already met these 4, but over there's Tom, David from Palladium, Emma's here from Palladium, Sinead. There's obviously the Newgate team here, also able to talk to you about some of the work that we do in the world of climate and sustainability, and Andrew's leadership at Green and Good. The other good news is we're going to send you an email with all sorts of details about Revere tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about not finding enough material about it. There's also a QR code for those who understand QR codes that are able that will provide you for more information. So thank you for coming. Please come forward some food. That's really important that you eat before you go. The cleaners show up at 9, so we've got plenty of time for discussion and debate on an informal basis from now on. Thank you.
Thank you.